And I'd like to welcome everybody once again back to the Buffalo History Channel. I'd like to first of all thank everybody for their support of this, not only this platform, but of this particular content series, The Soul of Buffalo TV. The response to this has been nothing short of amazing over the past year. We've highlighted many of the legends that have come onto our TV sets back in the city of Buffalo, from Sandy White to Les Trent to Daryl Denard to Octavia Hudson. And even we've shown clips of the old show Afro Central, and we've even highlighted some of the personalities of Buffalo Public Access TV. This has been a wonderful, the responses has been amazing. And I have another television legend of Buffalo. You saw this man back in the day on Channel 2. We all remember Stan's Storybook back in the day, and hosted Buffalo, etc., and Probe. He's been very active in the community as well. And we'll hear all about that right here from the one and only Stan Coleman. Stan, welcome to the Buffalo History Channel, sir.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all those accolades. I never think about that. You know, it's just doing your job.
Oh, yeah. So we always start from the beginning, Stan. Well, how did you get into television? Well, I know you said, we said on off the air, you started in radio. So how did everything begin for you?
Well, I'm a native Chicagoan, and I went to radio school in Chicago. And I ended up, the short version is that I ended up in Iowa, where my family, when they came from the South, my grandmother, when they came from the South, they came up from Mississippi to Iowa, Waterloo, Iowa. And I had been looking for a job for about a year out of radio school. I had gone to radio school and engineering school. And an uncle of mine said, well, go see your aunt. She knows everybody. She had been involved in the civil rights movement and all of that back then. This was in the early 70s when I went. But she had been in civil rights movement. Right. And I went to see her. And at first I was embarrassed to tell people this story, but I'm very proud to tell her. She was very influential in my family's life. She was my mother's sister. And she literally took me by the hand and went to every radio station and TV station in Waterloo. Waterloo is about the size, for those of you who are from Buffalo, Waterloo is about the size of Cheektowaga. But amazingly, they had a number of television stations and radio stations. And my aunt walked me literally to every one of them, going through the door. And she just walked up and said, my nephew went to radio school and he's looking for a job. And she would get in to talk to station managers, to which they politely told her, well, we really don't take people without experience. At the end of she thought she had exhausted all of that. And we were on our way home. She said, well, I think there's one radio station, and she didn't even know where it was. She guessed at where the road to take, and we did, and we saw the antenna, followed it. It was in the middle of a cornfield, and the station was at the base of it. And the short story is that through faith in God, I ended up being hired by them at a point later. Because when I got there, the guy said, well, I do need a person, a combo guy, which was you had to have a radio license, and a combo guy, you had to have an engineering license, because only an engineer could touch the transmitter, just to even turn it on and off, which I had. And he said, he said, I got a guy, but if he doesn't make it, I'll keep you in mind. And about a month later, he called me up in Chicago and offered me the job. And I started in radio in Waterloo, Iowa. And again, my aunt intervened and told me about a guy who had gone to Columbia University in New York. It was a special program at the Graduate School of Journalism. I found the program, applied. They looked at 2,500 people across the country, and they only took 25 students. I was one. Okay. And so I went there, and that's where I learned television. I learned everything: writing, editing, photography, the whole ball of wax. And they provided me a job. And my first job was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that was back in 1971. I went to Chattanooga, and I worked there for a year. I left there and moved up to Louisville, Kentucky. I worked there for about 2.5 years, about 2 years. And then the station manager in Louisville, when I got there, he was new. And he said to all of us, he said, you give me a good 2 years, and then if you want to move on, I'll help you find a job. Mm-hmm. He passed my name on to Stuart Dan, who was the news director at Channel 2 at the time. Mm-hmm. And Stuart called me up and hired me to come to Buffalo. And that's how I ended up in Buffalo. That was 1976. Okay. And I've been in Buffalo. I had planned to stay in Buffalo only 2.5 years and then move on up the ladder. Mm-hmm. And I've been here ever since.
Okay. So it's 1976. That was around the time of the first Juneteenth. So coming
also
into
the year of that winter was the year of the blizzard.
Yeah, the blizzard of 77.
Yes.
Yeah. So coming into Channel 2, I mean, what were some of the, talk to us about what it was like to be there, just as probably, I'm not sure how many other Black people were at Channel 2. I'm sure you're probably one of the few that was on the air. What's it like trying to function in that environment at that time?
Well, amazingly, all right. Now, when I went to Columbia, my roommate was Bob Gist.
Oh, okay.
Bob Gist was weekend anchor at Channel 2.
Yeah.
And he and I were roommates, and he left Columbia and came back to Buffalo. I went to Chattanooga. And so as fate and God would have it, I ended up at Channel 2 with him. And I was amazed when I got here. There were Blacks everywhere. June Bacon Bursey, I knew of. I did not meet her. She was on the air. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of other people. Now that I have to call their names, it won't come out of my mouth, but I knew them all. Every station, Chuck Lampkin, he was on the air. He was at Channel 4. And every station had Black reporters, and a number of them had Channel 2 and Channel 4 for certain. I don't remember if Channel 7 had a Black anchor. But what's his name?
I know they had John Winston, but I'm not sure if he was
that's
on
the name I was about. I was looking
for
John Winston. I knew all of them very well, and so I was shocked when I got here. And even though I had been in television for about 3.5 years in 2 markets and what have you, I responded as if a rookie. I assumed, it was a new market. These people were all experienced. I had experience, but I didn't want to come in like I'm a Mr. Know-it-all kind of thing.
Right.
And so at Channel 2, in the newsroom, it was difficult because, and I say difficult because they treated me like a rookie, one, and what I didn't know was what I didn't know, and I was. Actually, Channel 2 had a very robust equal opportunity program in-house. Okay. In every department, they made sure that there was a minority in every department. Okay. And it took me a while to realize that they hired me for a skill. I was brought to Buffalo to be what they call the action reporter at the time.
Okay.
And what stations did was, if somebody had a problem with a company or somebody, the station would go out and through intimidations, for lack of a better word, get action for them. That was my job. Okay, but what they really wanted was they wanted somebody to go out and shame people into responding. Okay, they had a guy who was doing that, but he moved on to something else. And so, but I was not aware that they didn't sit down and explain that, well, we really want you to go out and be funny and shame companies into that. I took the job seriously. We're going to go out and we're going to, browbeat you into doing things. But anyway, the other thing that I didn't realize was, or I didn't accept, was there are things I still needed to learn. But technically, I couldn't type. Okay, we had typewriters then. There was none of this computing stuff. I couldn't type, but my workaround was I just simply did my entire story out in the street, including the part I had to say my stand up. I would record it in the street. So when I got back, the only thing I had to type was the lead, which was about 3 or 4 sentences for the anchor person to read. but there were other things I needed to learn. So I had to grow is the bottom line. I had to grow. And I was not aware of that. I in my mind, I'm a reporter, and I'm a reporter like the rest of you. I've been doing this job for 3 years and I've had no complaints. So it was difficult at the start, but you know how they say you give you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, that's what I did. I was good at features. I was always good at features. When I was in Louisville, Kentucky, I was good at doing feature stories. I wasn't a feature reporter, but I could do feature stories. I was good at that. Right. And I was good at it doing here. My first feature was called Coleman's Corner.
Okay.
And that was before Buffalo, et cetera, and Stan Storybook and all of that. And the funny thing about that is, that I was out one day, a friend of mine and I, we were out, and we had gone to the liquor store for some reason or another. And when I walked through the door, a customer saw me and he yells out, "Coleman's Corner." I was in shock. I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Oh, yeah." And he started telling me things that I had done. And I was amazed that he remembered that. And so then I had a respect for my ability to do features. And so that didn't bother me. And Stan's Storybook came later. Then when I moved into public affairs, they moved me into public affairs. So I negotiated with them, because at that point in time, public affairs was basically a throwaway for the station. All stations, not just ours, all of them. Public affairs was something the government required them to do.
Right.
And so they'd go out, find somebody on the street who wanted to be on TV, pay them $100. They come in, sit down for 30 minutes, and they would point the cameras at him. The other one would be, and I say him, whoever the host was, because they were females. Point the other camera at the guest, and a camera to shoot the two of them. And then after that, they'd say, "Go." And then the crew would go have coffee until break time,
Right.
And when I sat and I talked to them, I said, "Is this a demotion?" "Oh, no. I said, "Well, what can I do?" "Whatever you want." "Oh," I said, "because I intend to do real TV." They said, "Oh, yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great." In other words, just say yes and then get out of our office.
Right.
I did that. And I went and put together Buffalo, et cetera, and Probe the same way that any other program that they produced, except that I was doing it by myself. Versus the news department had 30 people doing it. I produced 2 half-hour programs a week, every week, by myself. And our first show won a state award. And then later, we ultimately won national awards and state awards producing the programs that we did. Buffalo, et cetera, was a magazine show, a local magazine show. And Probe was a news magazine show, and it was more serious. And so I'm very proud of that, and we changed the face of public affairs in Buffalo with those 2 programs, because once I started doing it, then Channel 7 and Channel 4 started doing that, and they got rid of that old format of just sitting you down and boring you to death. It was a lot of work. Yeah. Because I had to do it I don't know what they did over at their stations, but I had to do it all by myself. And that was where the skills that I learned at Columbia came in. I wrote it, I shot it, I edited it, and I hosted it. And I have to give credit to Diane Fancher, who is still working, I believe, over at Channel 29. She was my assistant. She didn't have any of those skills, so I had to teach her to be able to assist me, but we were able to do that. And we did that for a number of years. When I went in, I told her, I said, they don't pay people what they pay me to do this. Okay, so we're not going to be here very long. And what they're going to end up telling you is that they can't afford to pay us. Then they're going to say they have no place for us to go, and we're out. So learn all you can, and then we'll move on. Unfortunately, well, I guess you could say fortunately for both of us, it was so good they couldn't afford to get away. They found out they could sell it. And that's how, and I was there I did that for, it's hard for me to remember now because it's so many years ago, at least 5 years. I expected that we would have been gone for a year, but they couldn't get rid of us because we produced a product that they could use. And I would tell that we would have interns, and I would tell them, especially minority and female interns, that you're going to face obstacles in this business. It was not meant for you to be here. It was not designed for you to be here. Okay, you're here.
I found that out.
Yeah, pressures force them to accept us. You're going to find obstacles.
Right.
You let that stop you. You find a way around them.
Right. Right.
If you go under them, around them, over them, or what have you, you don't get discouraged. You find a way around them. And this is not a place to stop. You learn all you can learn here, and then you move up. You want to make the money that this business pays. Everybody has that stereotype of TV reporters, and they're making millions of dollars, and they're living in penthouses and all that. That's what the movies would show you. Mm-hmm. And they have a live camera following them around 24/7. First off, that's not true, but it can pay very well. Mm-hmm. You want to do that, you got to find a way around the obstacles. And so that's what I would teach them. And I said, I have no problem with teaching you anything I know. I'll teach you how to edit, write, shoot, and all of that. What I cannot teach you is my creativity. That's your own. Okay. And that was our beginning.
Yeah. One of the things I've said to everybody I've had on this platform is that I can remember watching all of you grow when I was growing up, and it didn't matter if I was in my home with my parents or at my grandparents' home. When I can remember whenever the news came on, and you or Sandy or Les or Daryl or John Winston, anybody came on, whatever was going on in the house stopped because everybody wanted to see what the brother or sister on TV was talking about, especially back at that time, because it was just something about seeing a familiar, it was like seeing a familiar face on TV, and just the significance of that.
The beauty of all of that is today, even today, as like last week, mm-hmm. A guy, people walk up to me and they remember, and they can call me by name, and they can tell me something they remember that I did. And they say, yeah, I used to watch you as a kid, to me. And that's like, oh, John, oh, wow. Am I that old? But, yeah. And that is so gratifying. And I have to say thank you to the city of Buffalo, because like I said, I was going to be here 2.5 years and move on. And the community in Buffalo has supported me even to this day, in all the different things that I was doing. One of the things about public affairs was it took me not only out of the building, but it also took me out of that news mindset. Mm-hmm. And I became involved in the community through my job, part of the community affairs. I was executive producer of community affairs. That was a fancy title they gave me. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough that the person that I worked under, Joe Lentini, his job was actually what his actual job in the station was. I think it was supposed to be human resources, but what he really did was to make sure he protected the station's license. And part of that was dealing with making sure what was going on with the community, minority representation inside the station and the building was part of his job. And they placed me under him. And he said, Stan, I don't care what you do, just make sure you get those shows on the air every week. And after that, I wouldn't see him anymore. And so I was autonomous, and that worked very well. But it also took me out into the community and got me involved in different community organizations and what have you, as a representative, ambassador for the station. But I ended up being involved with things. The one that was most prominent was the Martin Luther King birthday celebration. There was the Martin Luther King birthday celebration committee, and under them was it was called the Celebration Committee, and we were that arm which produced the Martin Luther King's program at Shays Buffalo, yes, for many, many years. And Cliff Bell was the chairman of that. And if you know Cliff Bell, if you talk to Cliff, If he invites you to a committee meeting, you're on the committee. And I simply applied my skills, my production skills, to that program. And that's what I did for them. And we would fill Shays Buffalo every year for Martin Luther King's birthday. And we put on a diverse community program. It wasn't just a African-American program. It was diverse, and it included, we intentionally tried to include everyone in the community, because that was what Martin Luther King was about. Many people think that Martin Luther King was only about African Americans. No, we were the most visible, but that's not all he was about. And Cliff Bell is an ardent admirer of Dr. Martin Luther King. So that's what, I learned a lot, and I was able to get out into the community. I was able to share things with them on how to react to the media and the television stations. So that the community supported me up until today, and I'm very thankful.
Okay, I remember going back when you talked about the protecting of how they went to protect their FCC licenses. That he immediately brought to mind when I would. My father was friends with a man by the name of John Smith, who was the head of the Buffalo Black
Media
Media
John very well.
Coalition. And he would take me with him as a 15, 16-year-old when he would go to when I first started getting interested in working in television, and he would take me with him to go do the file reviews. Yeah, and that's kind of how I got exposed into like for example Channel 2 when they did one of their afternoon shows. This was back in 1988, and I would sit there and just do like a job shadow in there. So that's what it. Since you knew him, can you share some thoughts of John Smith and the Buffalo Black Media Coalition? I know they did that. They did a media convention here, I think back in '85 or something like that.
I was not a part of that, but I knew John very well.
Okay.
John was he was the media man in the community.
Yes.
And whenever it came time for the review of the license, the station was up for its license. Most people don't realize that television and radio stations are small businesses. They're independently owned. Everyone thinks that they're part of the network. No, the network is a service that they purchase. Okay, just like if you back in the day when you used to have the newspaper come to your house. Okay, and they needed a license to broadcast over the air. The airwaves belong to the federal government, to the public, and they needed a license to broadcast. So I think it was 5 years, they had to have their license reviewed, and they could lose that license if someone could show that they were not serving the community. John, I think, was working with the NAACP and the Urban League and all those groups, and he would be the person to head up coming in, and he would come in and actually look at their files. And it was always the same thing. They'd come in, they'd complain about what the stations weren't doing, how they were portraying minorities and what have you. And they would wrestle with that. He put on a number of their solution, or what they could get out of the stations, was that they would conduct a number of workshops, because one of the primary complaints was how the African American community was represented on the air. Right. Somehow the only thing they could seem to find in our community were the negatives, but they never could find the positives. And so they would complain about that. And the station's response always was that, well, we don't know anything about what's going on in the African American community. We don't have anybody that's, now I'm sitting here while they're talking,
Yep.
And I remember one particular time he had come in and he was talking to them. He was giving one of his workshops. There were people who actually resented it. Okay. And they were saying, oh, we don't, and finally my mouth gets me in trouble so much. I couldn't stand it, and I stood up and said, you guys need to stop. I said, every time, the community comes in and they say this to you, you say the same old thing. I said, but somehow you managed to find positive stories in Kenmore, Lancaster, Hamburg, you know, all of that. But you can't find a positive story in the Black community from this station, which is 6 blocks away. Okay. It's not because we're not interested. Or, you know, one guy got up and he was real nasty. And I don't need this and I don't need. I said, you are the worst of all. You know, I just couldn't hold it. You know, and
I understand.
You know, and so because they were ganging up on John. You know, and it just I couldn't stand it. And so, you know, we went through that, and the station had when I came here, one of my good friends, and he was a mentor. His name was Tom Cochran. When I came here, Tom was a director at Channel 2 when I got here. They did the same thing. They did the shuffle thing with him like they did with me. They decided they didn't have a minority in the sales department, and they decided to put him there. Well, he was a director. He was a technical guy, and that's what he wanted to do with his life. And it was the same old thing. It came down to, well, you know, if you don't do this, we don't know if we have a job for you. So they put him in sales. Well, you take lemon, you give you lemons, you make lemonade. He ended up becoming the local sales manager.
Wow.
And he was the number 3 person in the building. And behind the general sales manager, then there was the station manager. But Tom and the station manager became really tight. Really tight. And so Tom was like a godfather for me. He could look out for me, you know, and I would tell all my interns to see, you find somebody that can godfather you and protect you, which is what he did for me. And so in talking with him, he would tell me war stories about him. He said, Stan, they would be in directors meetings or department head meetings. And he said they'd sit there and talk about the African American community like he's not there. And they would say things like, well, you know, when they come in, you know, we'll be nice and we'll be polite. And then we give them a task, which is an obstacle. He said, and you can almost forget them. They're not going to overcome the task, and we won't have to worry about that again. He said, but if they do and come back, you give them another obstacle. Ultimately, they would, you know, this was their strategy, and they're having this conversation with him sitting there in front of them.
Right.
You know, and so I learned, you know, now as broadcasters, people don't understand. They get their knowledge about us from television, or the movies and what have you. Jobs are hard to come by. Getting in the door is you don't walk in and put in you can, but you don't walk in and put in an application to get to be a news person or anything else in the building.
Just if get a foot in the door, period.
Right. If they need somebody today and you're fortunate to walk in that day, you may get hired. Other than that, you walk in, they take your application and they put it in the circular, they put it in the cabinet, nobody ever looks at it. And I saw that physically happen. Young person came in, applied, went to the file cabinet. Well, in the time it took them to leave, they lost the person. And another young woman who was African-American had come in the next day to apply, and she got hired because it was a need right then. You know, so that's the nature of the business. And I would tell young people, you can't worry about that. It's there. It's going to be there. When you leave here and go someplace else, it's going to be there. Your job is work on your career, find a way around the obstacles, find yourself a godfather if you can. And when I was at Columbia, it was a special program for minorities because the business had been challenged, that there weren't enough minorities in the broadcast industry. We had been talking about, I think it was Spiro Agnew, I believe, and they charged the administration at the time of not having minorities, and then he turned it on them. Look at your own industry. So they created this program specifically for minorities at Columbia University. And when I got there, they said, you're not here to learn television. We can teach you that. You're here is when you leave here is to go out into the world and spread what we teach you and to generate, educate the community and other minorities coming up. And that is what I was doing. And that's why Buffalo, etc. was born. That's why Probe was born. It wasn't so much for my career as because I could have left here. Mm. It was, I was doing what I was taught to do, spread it so that young people like you and people that were behind me, you know, and it's so gratifying. I've had young people who were in the business here and they said, I'm here because I saw you. And that right there, you know, that was it for me. I'd done my job.
When I think about the Stan Storybook, because that's one of the main things that I remember about you, were there any particular stories that stood out for that you did during when you did that piece?
Oh, it's so many. I have gotten to my entire life. I was always looking for adventures since I was a teenager. So that gave me the opportunity to go and have adventures that most of us would never have. I did skydiving. I rode a bronc. Yes, I learned to skydive. I rode a bucking bronc. I learned to do that, nearly killed myself. The horse and I decided it was time for me to get off. And
the horse more so, right?
yeah, oh yeah, he came up with the idea to get off my back. And after about four bucks, I decided, you know what, that's a good idea. But I decided to get off at the run. He was going up, and I decided to get off and go down. And I fell on my arm and messed up my rotator cuff. But I mean, it's a story to tell. Yeah. I learned to fly. I got a pilot's license. And that came from a story I had done on gliding. I did a story on gliding. My intent in Stan's Storybook was to do things. It was for minorities, Blacks, Africans, and anybody else who would not be able to, who thought we couldn't do these things, to say it's okay, we can do them, and it's okay to do them. I did skiing. I did. I was in the Erie County Demolition Derby a couple of years in a row. We bought a car, designed the car, and I drove in that. I did something that people seem to remember. A lot of people remember. I didn't think it was particularly. It was interesting. Was a guy had bought some motorized roller skates, and the skates had motors on them, and it had a cable, and you had a power thing in it. Now that's commonplace, but back then that was brand new, and you could roller skate. And I did that. I did. There was another guy, an African-American young man, who started a tour business in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on roller skates. So if you could roller skate, you would roller skate with him, and he'd give you a guided tour around Niagara Falls. I would add the Stan Storybook touch to it, you know, which was to be self-deprecating and to be sort of funny and that sort of thing. Inside the building, one of an incident that I remember is that we were in the newsroom one day, everybody's talking and what have you, and it was something silly or stupid that came up, and they wanted they up and tried to get the anchor guy to do it, and it was like they tossed it around the room, and then finally someone says, "Oh, let Stan do it. Yeah, he can do that sort of thing," and it hit me, you know. I'm not the station clown. I work, and I told him that I'm not the station clown. I work like you work, you know. But I would come dressed for what I was going to do. So I might come in jeans and a shirt like this back in the day when everybody wore suits, and I was dressed for what I was going to do. And that day was, I had a different mindset, you know, because it said to me that they didn't take me seriously, and I wasn't respected. So from that day forward, they never saw me in the building and I wasn't in my suit. If I was going someplace and I needed to change my clothes, I go to the locker room, change my clothes, go to the story, come back, put my suit back on, and come back into the newsroom. Because I wanted inside the building. What I liked about my industry was outside the building. Inside the building, you had to deal with the politics and the race issues and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted them to be able to respect us. And when I look at the people who are on the air now and these young people and what they're doing and where they're going, they have respect. And that was what, those are the battles that I was fighting inside the building. And what allowed me to stay was that the community supported me. Okay. As a matter of fact, Daryl Denard owes his job. And this, I learned this from him. And I had been in Daryl, he came out of college and he got hired at Channel 2 working in the production department. Basically what you do is you pull cables, hang lights, and it's not really sophisticated.
Yeah.
He wanted to be in news and wanted to be an anchor and on the air. He would come in on the weekends, and Don Dawkins, who was a photographer, also from Chicago. Don Dawkins and I happened to work on one weekend day together. And he would come in on his off day and ride with us, and we would show him, what we did and how we did it, and helped him build that up. And so that's how it came about. But what happened would happen again. John Smith and all these guys. John was still alive, I think, at that time. And when they would talk to the community, and the community started talking about what they didn't have anybody, like as if we didn't exist. And Daryl's name would come up. And after it came up enough, they decided they were going to move Daryl into news. Well, that would have made me, Daryl, Beverly Armstrong, and Bob Gist all in the news department. Well, that's 4 of us. And Daryl was the only minority in the production department. And so they wanted to move someone. They'd have to put somebody in the production department. So that's how that switch came about, was to put Daryl into the news department. So they wanted to talk me into going into production. And as I said, lemons to lemonade, Daryl got in. He was terrible. They put him on the air. And, he was stumbling and fumbling. He wasn't prepared. That was not what he was there for. And so they allowed that to be there. But the thing about Daryl, and I learned from Daryl, was you get involved in the community, they will back you up. That's what he did. And I learned that lesson from him. And even though I was a veteran, ahead of him, you can always learn. And he got better. Daryl would watch his performance every day and look at his mistakes, and he would correct them. And I was also proud of him for that, so he got better. It wasn't like he had the big head and thought I'm a TV anchor and what have you. I remember, and I won't call his name, but there was one anchor when I got here, he couldn't read. He was on the air as an anchor and he could not read. And he was literally either stumbling over his words or incorrectly pronouncing them or what have you. But that's not why we were there. We were there for our skin color. And after a while, you figure that out.
It brings to mind, I'm just now remembering an interview I saw someone do with you. I think it was when you were doing stuff with the government channel with your company, Appaloosa. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. You would think it was Tom Terapaki that was interviewing you. And you said something that stuck out to me, that when you just came to Buffalo and starting to report, you would be like on the city hall beat or something like that. And then whenever you wanted to find out what was going on in some of the districts, you made it a point to go to all the council members' offices just to collect information to find out what was going on in the community, in their communities that they were overseeing. That way, that would help you kind of come up with some other news stories on those communities.
Yes, precisely. Actually, what happened is, I had the city hall beat and I had the county beat. Actually, there were no such things. There was something to give me something to do. And I would go down to the council meeting every week. And I'm sitting there, and every time a piece of legislation came up, they say received and filed. Received and filed. There was no discussion, no debate or whatever. And I didn't understand, it's like I'm waiting for a story and nothing happened. And so at that particular time, James Pitts was in office, Dave Collins was in office, George Arthur was in office. I think Cliff Bell was in office. And I forgot which one of them I spoke to, but I asked them about this. And they said, well, if you want to know what's going on, you have to go to the committee meetings. I'm like, oh, the committee meetings was some other time. I found out when the committee meetings were, and I would go to them, and that's where the debate and the discussion happened. And that was one of those things where they supported me and told me that I used to play racquetball with Jim Pitts. Well, let's put it this way. I used to go to the court with Jim Pitts, and he jacked me up every time I go to play. I thought I could play till I started playing with him. But anyway, they were very supportive about that. And I learned. And then I started breaking stories. And that same method helped me with, I told you about, one of the shows I produced was Probe, which was a news magazine show. Mm-hmm. I learned how to do television the proper way from Columbia. The guys here, I don't know where they learned it from, but you have to develop contacts and establish relationships with people. That is, you turn on any national show right now and you see those correspondents, they can get those stories because they know those people personally and intimately. And that's what I did. I got to learn them. And so when I developed the show Probe, which was a serious news magazine show, just like 60 Minutes or any other show, I applied that method, and I would scoop the newsroom. And so then when the newsroom finally got wind of it or decided to do that, and they would start researching the story, they'd get to them, and those people would tell them, well, see, talk to Stan Coleman. He's already been here. And they got so they resented me, but it's like, hey, they'd eventually have to come to me because the other people wouldn't want to do the interview twice. It's go see him. He's got the tape. Right. So that worked out real well.
All right. So you started after television. You started. We mentioned earlier you started Appaloosa Productions, your production company. Just talk to us about Appaloosa Productions.
Well, actually, I started Appaloosa Productions while I was still working at Channel 2.
Okay.
Every news reporter, thinks they want to start a production company. We all, you have, because you got these skills.
Right.
So you think you want to start a production company. Well, first of all, that I was the only person in the newsroom at the time who had those skills. Most of the reporters that were there, all they could do was ask questions. They didn't know how to edit. Because we had photographers and editors.
Right.
They didn't need to know. I came with those skills. But anyway, what happened was just like you're saying, there was a group of African-American business people. They started a conglomeration. There were about 5 different companies, and they were expecting to grow, and they thought they needed a marketing media person. And they came to me and asked me would I consider it. And then they said they didn't have any money to pay me. And so then they said, but we've got a guy who, one of our people, he's worth $1 million, and we can get you started in business for no money. To which I'm saying, if you're saying absolutely no money, I'll listen. And I said, but if you tell me no money, that's exactly what I expect. I don't want you to come to me later and tell me I got to come out of my pocket with money. Well, of course, and that's a story. That was an adventure in itself. But Appaloosa got off the ground. I had to come out of my pocket with some money. And I've got adventure stories I can tell you about all of that beginning. But Appaloosa was born in 1988. My first big contract was with the Senecas. My first big contract was customer was the station itself. Ultimately, we got a new station manager, and whenever there's a new station is sold and somebody new comes in, they want to make money, so they start cutting stuff, and the thing you cut are people. You cut people, and so it finally got to a point where we didn't produce a lot of money. We were sellable, and the station manager had cut Diane. So it was just me. I'm doing it all by myself. Finally, he called me to the office and he said, Stan, I can't cut anymore. He said, I can't justify paying out what I pay for you for what you do. And then in the next sentence, he says, how would you like a contract from the station? and we would pay you to do what you do. And that was my first big contract. And so while I was still on the air working at Channel 2, people thought I physically was an employee. No, actually, I was a contractor in Appaloosa Production. And what we did is we produced Buffalo, etc. We produced Probe. And then the news department had been stripped to the point where they didn't have enough reporters. I got a contract to be a contract reporter. Then they needed someone to do the morning cut-ins, and I got a contract to do that. And at one point, I had more airtime than the anchors that they had in the newsroom for all the different things I was producing for them. Since that time, excuse me, my company grew, and I did contracts all over the area. And I got a contract with a foundation called the Hope for Tomorrow Foundation. Okay. And that came to me by, there was a guy that I had, he has his own marketing company, a small marketing. Well, he's small, he's by himself, but his clients, he has $1 million clients. He remembered me for being nice to him. He had come to Channel 2 and tried to get them to give him a public affairs show, and they brushed him off, and so they brushed him to me, and I was nice to him. He remembered that, and he got me a contract with this foundation, the Hope for Tomorrow Foundation. They hired me, and for 20 years, I traveled over the entire planet doing documentaries for them.
Wow.
And they paid well. They got to the point where they paid me up front. I was taking it as a year-to-year kind of thing, and they got to the point they decided to go someplace. They asked me, "Are you going?" I said, "If you hire me, yeah, I'm going." So I have been to 5 of the 7 continents. Okay. Over 20 countries and over 30 cities. And I've done documentaries in each one of them. And they aired, these people would buy time on the cable company, whoever was owning it at the time. But for 20 years, I did that, and I traveled the world.
Didn't you have a contract, I remember, with the city of Buffalo when they did the public access and the government channel?
Yes. They wanted to do a government channel, and I had a contract with them. I don't know, was that what Tom Terapaki interviewed me? I interviewed him. And I had a contract to do that with the city. And one of the things about doing business with the government is you learn how things work. Okay. And I was fortunate to get that contract. And it was interesting and enlightening,
Okay, so you talked earlier about the young when you see the young people come up. Certainly, things in the industry have certainly changed from where they were back in the day. You have social media. You have, even with journalists now, you have MMJs and backpack journalists, and journalists are now taking their own cameras and shooting and editing and pretty much doing all of their own work now. What do you think when you see some of the young folks today, particularly in the Buffalo market?
I am not surprised. I was never surprised, because when I was working in Chattanooga, I worked at a station. There was another African-American guy who worked there. There was an African-American guy who worked over at the ABC station. We would have lunch together every day. Mm-hmm. There was another young man. And one day we're out in the market. He worked at the other station. I worked at the NBC station. Gary worked at the ABC station. So this young man must have worked at the CBS station. And one day we shot film. This was before videotape. And we were out covering a story. He had the camera on his shoulder. He had the microphone cord wrapped around his neck, and he's holding the microphone out with his hand. Mm-hmm. And I had never seen that. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying, that's the future. And so then once I got to Buffalo, I had moved up and come to Buffalo. All the stations I had worked at, well, before I got to Buffalo, there was only 2. But we worked as partners. And I would shoot for my partner and he would shoot for me. I would edit my story, he'd edit his, and I'd write mine, he'd write his. I got to Buffalo when videotape came out. First thing off, it was a 2-piece unit, and they weighed 40 pounds each. The camera was 40 pounds, the recorder was 40 pounds. But ultimately, as videotape got smaller and I was having a conversation with an engineer. And I told him, Channel 2 still had photographers at that time. I told him the future is going to be where you won't have any photographers and reporters will have to shoot their own video. And he swore up and down that would never happen. Well, it was maybe a month ago, and I was on Elmwood Avenue, and we're shooting. Here was a reporter mounting the camera on a tripod, flip the screen, and he'd do his own stand-up right there. That's where they are today. And now they edit their own stuff at the station. The reporters do. So I'm not surprised. It's not a bad thing. Social media is not a bad thing if the person what the problem is with social media is integrity. You don't know who you're listening to and if they're telling you the truth or if they know what they're talking about. And you have to understand that people have their own, we were taught that in school. Everybody has their own agenda. So that's something that you have to take into consideration. People are getting their news from the internet, but the problem is can you trust the person that you're listening to? And they're telling you the truth. At present, I'm working with the Buffalo African American Museum Committee.
Yes.
And one of the things that we want to do is to provide bus trips to different venues that what we've done is we made a committee and we've got an event called Together as One. And we've brought together a number of venues in the city, both minority and majority, that are doing Black history events at their venues. And what we're doing is promoting it, and we're promoting to have bus tours to bring people to it, drive people to those venues of Black history. And then one of our board members brought up the question about, well, we have to be sure that what they're doing is accurate and blah blah. And I had to say that that's not what we do. We promote. I can't go into somebody else and say, well, what are you going to tell me? What are you going to say? And I have to critique it and so forth and so on. But the reason it came up is because we are now at an era where they're burning books and putting books out of school, and there are those who want to manipulate the information that we get. And so I could see his point, and all I can say is that if you're going to get your information from the internet, you got to be cognizant of the source. One of the things about mainstream media is that they are very, very proud of, and one, they're competitive. See, the thing about the internet is it doesn't cost you anything. You and I are doing this, and it probably costs you very little to produce this, if anything.
Right.
They, on the other hand, have to make money, and they have to compete against each other. Because, in news from the day I started, the news director, they all watch each other. Don't let me see a story on somebody else's air that we don't have. Okay. And that it's ours. A story that I'm very proud of is, and I tell all the time, is my first day in Columbia, where we were in Columbia, we got training on how to report in writing, and then they would bring in professionals, New York professional producers and camera people to work with us, and they kicked us out on the street. They gave us a story to cover and kicked us out on the street. We were the only people who were rookies. Everybody else were working professionals. And my first story was there was a strike going on at the Transportation Authority. I forgot the name of it. The Transportation Authority in New York City.
Right.
And they were having a strike, and they shut down the Lincoln Tunnel. I'm sent to cover the Lincoln Tunnel. And when I get there, there are dozens of media outlets. Every media outlet in New York City was there. And the union people were going to have a press conference, but they were talking. So the press conference hadn't started. And I'm standing there with Bob Teague was the photographer. He's a famous photographer now. And there was he was my photographer at the time. And when the press conference started, we all jumped up and we were supposed to get, I was so nervous. I mean, I thought I was going to fall down. And I got there in a group of reporters, but I'm at the back and he's behind me, poking me in the back. Get in there, get in there, get in there. I was so afraid of him. I ended up at the front and he kept poking me, ask a question. And he scared me so badly that I just started firing questions, one right after the other. And you're taught when you ask a question, you bring your microphone to your mouth and you want them to respond, you put the microphone to their mouth. I ended up dominating the interview. So all of New York's media were going from him to me, back and forth. I get back to class that evening, and we had to stay in class and watch the news. We were supposed to go home and watch it as part of our homework assignment every night. Well, of course, we weren't doing it. So then our instructor said, well, there's a way to fix this. You will stay here and we'll watch it together. And there I was on New York TV, on everybody's station that night. That was my first story I'd ever done. And of course, I got a standing ovation. I couldn't tell them how scared I was.
All on you. Hey, he gave you that big push. Now that you mentioned the stories, and this just popped into my head, and I'm gonna be wrapping this up soon. Because you were a reporter around this time. What were your memories? I'm sure you did some stories on it. The 22 caliber killer. What were your memories of that?
The whole city was in terror because it could be anybody, anytime, anywhere. We didn't know what to do. And I don't remember if I particularly had any did any stories directly with it, because nobody, obviously we didn't know who he was.
Right.
And so all we could report on the results of whatever investigation was going on and at what spot something had happened and what have you. So I may or may not have had a report, but I remember the whole city was scared.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you were weren't you I think you were a professor or did some teaching at Madai College?
A single semester. It was the worst experience of my life.
Oh, okay.
And well, no, it wasn't school so much.
Uh-huh.
It was I was shocked at the college environment. You know, they asked me to do it. They said, well, you know, I said, well, what time do you want? They asked me, they said, you set your own time. I said, well, fine. I start my job at 9 o'clock. And so class is at 8, you know. And then I found out that the students were accustomed to pretty much doing what they want. And I didn't understand that, you know. And so here I am at 8 o'clock and they're drifting in whenever they felt like drifting in. And then it's one thing you're late, but then it's like they wanted me to start over again because they were late. So then I had to put down class starts at 8. If you're here, fine. If you're not here, you got to get it from somebody else. So then, you know, next thing I know, I had people come in, they'd come in to be there, but then they'd get up and walk out. And I couldn't understand that. And I'm like, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to get something to eat.
Goodness.
What? You know, and the mistake was that I had come from a different environment. You didn't do that.
Right.
You know, that just didn't happen, you know, and if you want, you were on your own. So then it turned around. All right, so I'm teaching you this information. We're gonna have a quiz. What, a test? I said, it's a quiz, 10 questions. Oh my God. Oh, it was terrible. It was very frustrating. And I told him, I said, if you want to work in my business, it is very regimented. Okay. The news starts at 6 o'clock, precisely 6 o'clock, not 6:01, not 6 and 6:30, none of that. Right. If you're not there, and if you have the lead story and it's not ready, you're going to have to explain why you don't have that story ready. Right. If you go to an interview, you better come back with at least the same information that everybody else has, because the news director is going to want to know, how come you didn't get this part of the story? I said, that's just the way it is. And back then, when you had film, we had to be back in the shop by 3 o'clock because the film had to be processed. So if you come back late, then the film's going to be processed late, and it's a ripple effect. So I said, if you want to be in this business, you're going to have to be it's disciplined. And the thing is that there will be 100 people waiting for your job, and you have to be able to do the job day one. people don't understand that in the news business, you don't come in and they train you. When you come in, they expect you to know how to do the job. And if you don't, you're going to be sitting in the news director's office a couple times. Then after that, you're not going to be there. That's it, And so that I didn't like the teaching environment. I don't blame the school or the students. I was not prepared for the environment. It was a learning experience. They produce very intelligent young people, and it came to me lately. There are more young people than there are jobs, which has always been the case. But Channel 2 they have a feature called Verify, and if you watch it, they're young people, and they're all different, and they're all very good. And so, there are a lot of good young people out there. Something that folks need to understand about the news department, the job is the same, whether it's in Waterloo, Iowa, or New York City. The job is the same. So you have a lot of good, talented young people who are looking for jobs and looking for slots. They want to move up. And the only reason they can't move up is maybe there's not a slot. It's not that they're not any good. So they have to be patient and work at it.
Right. Okay. Well, in closing, I mean, how's retirement?
Great. I recently bought a boat.
Oh, okay.
And someone said to me, "You're buying a boat at your age?" I said, "You're a young person. You don't have
Why not?
Yeah, we bought a boat. My wife and I enjoy our boat. We do this. We travel a lot. We've been on 7 different trips this year alone. We've always enjoyed each other. I've got 3 great grandchildren that are absolutely phenomenal, and I'm enjoying them. 2 of them are boys, and we're all buddies and what have you. The girl, she can't talk yet, but she runs her brother, so she'll be in the crew. So it's great. I'm still involved in some community stuff, and so I have no complaints.
Well, Stan Coleman, it has been a pleasure to have you on the Buffalo History Channel. Thank you for that great information.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody who's ever supported me, and good luck to you.
All right, my man.